We're about to embark on a potentially dangerous mission. There could be physical violence, there could be gunplay, and there's the slightest chance that somebody might even get killed. So if anybody wants out, now is the time to say it.
I'm out.
Me too.
Ditto.
Hey, don't we have a gig around here or somewhere?
Yeah, sorry, I got a dental appointment.
Kermit, Fozzie, Gonzo, and the rest of the Muppet gang try to stop a jewel thief before he steals a priceless diamond. This week, we discuss if there is such a thing as a classic 1981 Oldsmobile, the physics of being pushed out of a plane, and what it's like to stay in a real-life happiness hotel. We also share our thoughts on the upcoming Superman reboot before finding out if the Great Muppet Caper stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with the glove. Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Test of Time. My name is Alan Noah, and who are you?
My name is James Brief. You know who I am, Al, and so do the listeners, unless it's the first time they're listening.
That's true. I do know who you are, and it would be a weird place to come into our podcast for the second in our trilogy of Muppet movies, but we're continuing with March Muppet Madness, and we're going to talk about the second Muppet movie that was made, The Great Muppet Caper. But first, before we get into that, there's some big Superman news that hit.
There is a rumor that the next Superman film, which is yet another reboot, might possibly have a black Superman.
Right. They announced that J.J. Abrams is producing a new Superman movie. It's being scripted by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and when the story first hit, it was Henry Cavill wants to be Superman again. Will he, won't they? And then some reports were coming out that said that this movie is going to feature a black Superman, which could be awesome. A couple years ago, Michael B. Jordan was saying that he wanted to be Superman in a movie, and he wanted to do this character called Calvin Ellis, which is a Superman from a different Earth. I'm not so into like all of the different nuances of the multiverse and the different Supermen. Do you know who that character is?
Yeah, I am familiar with this. And there exists in the DC universe a multiverse. There's lots of Earths. There's Earth 1, Earth 2. There's the Earth where we are reading the comic books. Like, we exist. I forget which one we are on. But there is an Earth, Earth 23, where there is Calvin Ellis, and he is a black Superman. This is not Kal-El, the same character as the one that we are familiar with from, say, the Christopher Reeve films. But there have been sort of black Supermen before. You never really read comic books, did you, Al?
Not really, no.
The only time I really read comics was in the mid-90s, and I got into, I guess you could call it one of the biggest marketing superhero stories ever, was the death of Superman. I should say the so-called death of Superman, because he came back like a year later.
But he did die. They really did kill him. They didn't make it like, oh, he was asleep the whole time. Like, he was dead, and then he came back to life.
Yeah, it was a great storyline. You're right, he was actually dead, and actually Jonathan, who's his adoptive father on Earth in Kansas, who had died in the storyline and in many of the movies, he helps Kal-El in the afterlife kind of get back to the living world. But until Kal-El returned to Earth, there were actually 4 Supermen, who none of them turned out to really be Superman, but there was a cyborg Superman, there was a Superboy, the Eradicator, that was a Kryptonian artifact that took on the role of Superman, and then there was this black guy named John Henry Irons, who wound up later taking the moniker not of Superman, but of just simply Steel, because he was the Man of Steel, and there was a terrible Shaquille O'Neal film in the 90s called Steel, real based on this character, but I don't believe had anything to do with Superman. So,
Right.
There is some precedence to this, and you already seen people on the internet. People are like, oh, what are they gonna make? Louis C.K., Black Panther?
People are saying that?
Well, probably not Louis C.K. But the thing is, Black Panther, you cannot separate the character from the race of the character. Superman doesn't have to be white. Maybe this phrase doesn't mean as much as it did 50 years ago, but truth, justice, and the American way. It's not about truth, justice, and, good old Southern boy from Kansas or something. So I think that the argument against this is silly. I just want a good movie. I really don't care.
Well, I think there's a lot more to this, though. I mean, I think that the idea of having a black Superman is important, with a capital I, especially now, especially in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, and especially when the Golden Globes just happened and there was all this about how there's no black people in the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. So there are problems with representation in Hollywood in general. But then at the superhero genre, we had Black Panther, which showed that telling black stories can be profitable as a superhero movie, but Chadwick Boseman died and he's not being recast. There will be a Black Panther 2. I stand by my prediction that Shuri will take on the mantle as the next Black Panther. But in the DC universe, there was the whole thing with Ray Fisher coming out against Joss Whedon, and he is most likely not coming back to the DC extended universe. Although it wouldn't surprise me if that changed, if now that more people are coming out against Joss Whedon, and I saw something that Cyborg has a really big role in the Justice League Snyder cut, maybe they could entice him to come back. Maybe. But even still, if they made a black Superman movie, hell, make it not this other guy from another Earth. Make it Kal-El. Make it Clark Kent. Maybe some Kryptonians are black. Maybe all Kryptonians are black. It's an alien race. Who knows? It doesn't matter in the sense of the story, but it does matter in our Earth, the Earth 87 where we're the audience. I think it really does matter. And it could be a really big step for the superhero genre. And hopefully they'll do it right. I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates, he wrote for the Black Panther comic book. I don't believe he was involved in the movie, but, he's got some comic book cred. This could be amazing.
I think it's not so as important to necessarily we need more black superheroes in terms of a black storyline. And, the central story of the first Black Panther film was inherently about race. One of the best Spider-Man films ever was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse that stars sort of an alternate Spider-Man, Miles Morales. And it was just a good film. You can maybe get lost in a story that doesn't need it. I'm not saying, I don't want to hear about race in a Superman story. If it's important to the story, it would work. I just don't think that's the theme of Superman or Batman. I just don't think that race is central to the story. But I think the representation is very important so that it's not just, if you're a black person, you can only be in a black film. That's actually a very important thing.
Sure, but race hasn't been in the Superman movies that we've seen so far, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be in a new Superman movie. In the old Superman comics that came out during the 1940s, Superman went to beat up Hitler. So, a Superman in a 2022, 23, who knows when it would come out movie, maybe this Superman does fight for racial justice. Maybe there are some themes about being a black American. Maybe there aren't. Maybe he's just punching General Zod in the face for 2 hours. But it's not too hard to imagine what is it like for this guy who is the most powerful man on the planet, but he still gets harassed when he's driving home from work because he's a black man driving down the street in a nice car. That's an interesting take on the Superman story. Maybe they would do something like that. Maybe not. I have no idea, but I think there's definitely potential there.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. I'm just hoping for a good film.
Yes, definitely I want a good film too. But let's talk about a movie that I certainly remember thinking was a good film when I was a kid, The Great Muppet Caper. Now, last week you were saying that you were not very familiar with the Muppets, but you thought that maybe you had seen this movie, or maybe there was just a lot of Muppet Caper merchandise in your house from when you were a kid, from your older brother and sister. Now that you've seen it, was this the first time that you saw it, or had you seen it before?
I did see this film. I definitely did.
Okay.
I remembered some of the earlier scenes and vaguely, kind of like a deja vu, like I've sort of heard these tunes before. And this is the second live-action Muppet film, but it's not a sequel to the Muppet movie. It's a completely, I guess, it's an independent film in the Muppet cinematic universe. And in this film, Kermit and Fozzie, they play journalists, and Gonzo is the photographer. And they travel to London to investigate a jewel robbery of fashion designer Lady Holiday. While in England, the trio stays at the Happiness Hotel, where they meet other Muppet friends. Kermit tries to interview Lady Holiday, but mistakenly thinks that Miss Piggy is the famous designer. When the real Lady Holiday is robbed, Miss Piggy finds herself framed for the crime, and it's up to Kermit and company to clear Piggy's name and prevent the theft of the fabulous baseball diamond.
So I believe this movie was less successful at the box office than the Muppet movie, but it did well enough because there was a third one, I assume.
Yeah, like I said last week, the Muppet movie, which made $76 million and was in the top 10 of the films of the year, that was actually the most successful Muppet film ever until 2011's Muppets. But this film did earn significantly less, even though its budget was higher at $14 million. And it opened on June 26, 1981, and it opened at number 5 with $2.9 million on its way to $26 million, which is a third of the amount that the previous film made.
Wow.
That being said, this is the kind of film that probably had a lot of replay value and it probably aired a lot. I'm almost positive I didn't see this in the theater because actually I know I didn't because it came out June 26, 1981. So, however I saw it on tape or if I did see it on tape, it was almost definitely taped off of like an ABC broadcast of it. So, I'm sure this film did make some good bucks.
I would think so. And this movie does continue the tradition of acknowledging that the Muppets are in a movie like they did in the Muppet movie. In the credits, it's Kermit and Fozzie and Gonzo in a hot air balloon, and they're talking about the credits while the credits are on the screen. Like it says The Great Muppet Caper, and they're like, oh, good title. And one person comes on and it says their name, BSC. And then Fozzie says, Kermit, what does BSC mean? Which is funny because that's a thing that people who are watching the movie are probably thinking. But here they are talking about it as characters in the movie. I did look it up, and it stands for the British Society of Cinematographers, if anyone was curious, because this movie was entirely shot in London.
When directed by Jim Henson comes on the screen, I like Fozzie was saying, Kermit, no one reads these names, do they? And Kermit's like, yeah, I mean, these guys have families too. I thought it was cute. It's meta, and this is sort of a musical movie like the first film. And it opens with the song, Hey, a Movie.
There'll be spectacle, there'll be fantasy, there'll be daring do and stuff like you would never see. Hey, a movie. Yeah, we're gonna be a movie starring everybody and me.
This song I remembered.
It's cute. It sets up the story. Within the song, Kermit stops and says, in this movie, me and Fozzie play journalists and Gonzo is our photographer. So he's explaining what's happening in the movie. It's a little bit weird that a character in a movie would explain that he himself is playing a different character, but it also makes sense because, like you said earlier, this movie is separate from the Muppet movie. These characters are now playing other characters, which could be confusing for a kid who just 2 years earlier saw the Muppet movie. I watched this with my kids, and when Kermit meets Miss Piggy later, my daughter was like, wait, don't they know each other? Because yes, they do, but not in this movie. So it sort of helps that they explain the premise of what's going to happen in this movie.
Yeah, and there is one joke in this film that when I first heard it, I didn't even get it. I thought I misheard it, but I think it's a really funny joke. And one of the jokes that's a running gag in this film is that Kermit and Fozzie Bear are identical twins. The end of the Hey, a Movie intro song is the headline of the newspaper that they work for that reads, "Identical twins work at paper." And it's a photo taken by Gonzo. And it's just funny because this green frog and brown bear obviously look nothing alike. It's sort of the same premise of the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Danny DeVito film Twins, except in that film, they're obviously at best fraternal twins. But this one, identical twins, and they really go with it. And the funny thing is that throughout the film, other people will confuse them because they totally think they look alike. And it's a surprisingly funny gag that works.
Yeah, I didn't remember that joke at all. And I had that same reaction at first of like, wait, they're twins? But it's funny because the gag is that bears wear hats. That's how you can tell them apart. Like when they say, you guys don't look anything alike, then Fozzie takes off his hat and then the boss at the paper is like, oh, now I see it. Like, what? And then he says that he gave them the job because he was friends with their father, and their father is like a green Fozzie Bear in like this picture, which is very funny. But they get fired because while they were taking pictures of themselves, they missed this like robbery that was happening right in front of them. And we see in the Hey, a Movie song that it's Charles Grodin, who is the thief who steals these diamonds from this fashion designer named Lady Holiday. And so Kermit says, don't fire us. We'll go to England. We'll get the scoop on the story. We'll figure out who stole the diamonds. And it doesn't work. They're still fired, but they go to England anyway, which I don't really think is like an important detail. But as I was watching it, I was thinking like, that's weird. They really have no motivation to go to England to track down this diamond thief.
This character, Lady Holiday, it's played by an actress, Diana Rigg, and this film came out, as I said, in June of 1981. Do you know what happened in July of 1981, Al? It was one of the biggest events of the 1980s worldwide.
Yes, my sister Samantha was born.
Yes, that is true. And second only to the birth of Samantha Noah was the so-called, and later we realized it was far from a fairy tale, but the fairy tale wedding of Diana and Prince Charles. And I really got the idea that Lady Holiday, and a coincidence that she's played by someone named Diana, the actress, but I got the feeling that she was kind of a little bit based on Princess Diana, because she sort of looks like her and is very glamorous and everyone likes her. I wonder if that really was based on her.
I don't know, but a lot of people might know Diana Rigg best as Lady Olenna from Game of Thrones, in which she was a much older character because she was a much older woman. In this movie, she's kind of a babe. I remember when she died, there were pictures of her on the TV show The Avengers, which I think was in the 60s. And you know, you saw that she was a hot young lady.
Yeah, I saw one episode of The Avengers like a couple of years ago, and she was beautiful. And, you know, I couldn't remember if I knew this tune, the Hey, a Movie, starring everybody and me.
And me.
Yeah. But the thing I totally remembered was the next scene, the trio, they're on their way to England, but they have absolutely no money. So they travel in the cargo section of an airplane. And they're in these boxes labeled Frog, Bear, and Gonzo is in a box called Whatever. And as they fly over England, because presumably this airplane went to like France or something, they just get tossed out the window. And that I totally remembered.
Yeah, it's a funny gag. They land in a pond. There are no parachutes. Like, they just are tossed out.
And they're also tossed out of the window like 10 seconds apart. So the fact that they land all in the same pond is pretty interesting. You know, you are not going to land on top of each other. So, you know, the Muppet film does not follow perfect physics.
Yes, that's true. And then when they land, they ask a random guy who's like sitting by the pond, you know, where they crash land, where should they stay? And he suggests they go to the Happiness Hotel. And unlike in the Muppet movie where the characters sort of slowly, one at a time, meet other Muppets, they just go to the Happiness Hotel and they meet pretty much all of the other Muppet characters in this one song. I think the only exception is Miss Piggy, who they meet a little bit later. But the gag is that this hotel is terrible. It's a dump. Nobody pays. They just kind of sneak out in the middle of the night.
Oh, there's no fire in the fireplace. There's no carpet on the floor. Don't try to order dinner. There's no kitchen anymore. But if the road been kind of bumpy and you need to rest a spell, well, welcome home to Happiness Hotel.
It's a very catchy song. It's sort of led by this old man who works there, who's a character named Pops, who's not like a major Muppet character, but I always like Pops.
Yeah, I feel like I've stayed at the Happiness Hotel. You never did like a backpacking trip and stayed in hostels, did you?
No.
Yeah, I have stayed in basically the Happiness Hotel. And actually, they always have names. Like, I think one I stayed in, which was possibly the worst night of sleep I ever had in my life, was at a place called Number One Hostel. And they're named the opposite of what they really are.
What was so bad about it?
It was like 110 degrees. You're basically like lying in a cot with like 7 other people sharing a room with them. Like 1 or 2 of them are snoring. I just remember being miserable, like not being tired, but being way too hot to sleep and just kind of like begging for the sweet embrace of like when you finally start feeling heavy in your eyes. And it just took forever. And it is like 20 years later, and I still think that was the worst night, one of the worst nights of sleep in my life.
Wow, that sounds pretty terrible. But so Kermit is going to interview Lady Holiday, and he and Fozzie and Gonzo all go. But before they get to Lady Holiday, we see her talking to some of her models. It's these 3 women, Marla, Carla, and Darla, who we later find out are involved in the jewel theft. But Miss Piggy shows up and she is looking for a job. She wants to be a model and she's asking Lady Holiday if she can be hired. And Lady Holiday hires her as a receptionist, but she's very excited for that. And as soon as she gets the job, Lady Holiday is talking about her brother, who is like an irresponsible parasite, I think she calls him. And he's a lazy ne'er-do-well, but they're going out for dinner later and she always has to take care of him and blah, 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 blah. And Miss Piggy's like, why are you telling me all of this? And Lady Holiday says, oh, it's plot exposition. It has to go somewhere, which made me laugh as like a meta line because, that always happens in movies where a character says all of this stuff where it's like, no one would ever say that stuff. But here she even acknowledges that, yeah, it's just plot exposition. You need this information. You need to know that this guy is my brother. And the brother is Nicky Holiday, played by Charles Grodin. We already know that he is the thief. But then Kermit shows up and he's looking for Lady Holiday. He thinks Miss Piggy is Lady Holiday, and they make a date for them to talk about the robbery. And Miss Piggy makes up an address for where she lives because she has to give Kermit, a fancy address. And Kermit's excited for this date. And then he and the guys go back to the Happiness Hotel and get ready for their date.
Actually, on the way there, they call a cab out. And one of the only other flashes of this film that I remembered is that Gonzo, he throws himself out onto the street so that a taxi will stop for them. And they're like, oh, Gonzo, that's a great way to catch a cab. And he goes, yeah, it's great when it works, implying that sometimes he gets run over.
Yeah, that is funny. And then the cab driver is a character, Beauregard, who's pretty funny.
And Fozzie is a little bit jealous of Kermit going on a date. Kermit finally says, all right, you can come with me if you want. And Fozzie goes, hey guys, we're all invited to the date. I thought that was great.
There's a whole song while Kermit's getting ready for the date. It's called Steppin' Out with a Star. It's not my favorite song, and it's not particularly memorable, but there is one shot while Kermit's getting ready where you can see his bright pink boxer shorts, which I just thought was funny. Like, oh, Kermit the Frog wears underwear, and they happen to be bright pink boxers.
I thought this was a very boring song. It slowed the film down a lot. And unfortunately, there's more than one of these songs. But once that song is over, Kermit and Piggy, they get to go on a date.
he picks her up at this apartment where she doesn't live, and she's like climbing into this house. And while she's doing that, the people who actually live there are having this like very bland, boring conversation. And the husband is John Cleese, who is hilarious. The woman who plays his wife is Joan Sanderson. Apparently she's a famous British actress. I didn't recognize her. I did think that this gag slowed the movie down a little bit because it's funny because it's John Cleese, but it's also not that funny. And it's very like dry British humor of like, oh, the weather we're having. Dreadful weather. Yes, dreadful weather. Oh, there's a pig climbing up the house. Oh, a pig, you say? Yes. It kind of goes on a little too long.
It goes on way too long, but they finally get to their date at the Dubonnet Club. Remember, these guys have no money, so they're at one of these fancy restaurants where I think it's like $1,600 for like a plate of salmon or something.
He says that the roast beef is the same price as an Oldsmobile, which is very, very funny, and also a test of timeline because Oldsmobiles are no longer a thing.
Well, I guess if it's a collector's item, then it's maybe even worth more. I don't know. But I don't think Oldsmobiles were ever really that valuable. Certainly a 1981 Oldsmobile.
Probably not.
Yeah. And Gonzo, he decides to go around to all the fancy other people at this club, and he decides to take their picture for money. There's a test of time thing because he says, give me your address and I'll mail you the picture and, give me $20 because, of course, it's film. And there's a cameo of Jim Henson, the director, and, of course, the creator of the Muppets.
Yeah. And speaking of the concept of film, Nikki steals Lady Holiday's necklace in this scene, and Gonzo happens to get a picture of it, which is great because, now he has proof. But while he's developing the film at the Happiness Hotel, he's using the bathroom as a dark room, and you hear all the other characters banging on the door because they need to use the bathroom, and they open the door, and the film is exposed, and the picture is ruined, and now he doesn't have proof anymore that Nikki is the thief, along with the three models, Marla, Carla, and Darla. But also in that dinner scene, Kermit finds out that Miss Piggy is not Lady Holiday, and he sees the real Lady Holiday, and he's pretty mad about that. He ends up going to a park, and he's like having this moment on a bench where he's mad, and Peter Falk comes over and talks to him and like says, oh, I know your story. And he gives him this whole long monologue about his brother-in-law owns a dry cleaning business and it failed, which again, like I got to imagine that joke isn't that funny for kids.
Yeah, it's more of like, we got a cameo, let's find a story here. Peter Falk is probably known best for a show kind of before our time, Columbo, but our generation remembers him as the grandpa in The Princess Bride, who reads a young Fred Savage the story. And it's fine cameo, but the best part of that scene is when there's just a random passerby that goes, hey, Dad, look, a bear. And like you said earlier, the father goes, no, honey, bears wear hats. So she's like, oh, okay, it's a frog.
Right. And then Miss Piggy shows up at this park, and she and Kermit kind of have a fight because Kermit's mad that she lied to him. But then they make up and they go for a bike ride. And we were talking last week how in the Muppet movie, it was a big deal that you see Kermit's legs when he's riding a bike. So how do you top it in the sequel? You don't just have Kermit riding a bike or just have Kermit and Miss Piggy riding a bike, but then all the other Muppets show up and they're all riding their bikes. And you could make the argument of like, okay, yeah, they did it with one character in the first movie. Now they did it with more characters in the second movie, whatever. But I have to say, it looks really good. I think it's still impressive seeing all of these characters not just riding a bike straight down the road, which is what Kermit did in the Muppet movie. Here, Miss Piggy and Kermit are like looping around each other. And then there are all these other characters who show up. Rizzo and all of the other rats are on like a tandem bike with like 4 seats, and they're all going together. I thought that scene looked really good. I was kind of impressed by that.
I mean, Jim Henson's one of the best puppeteers ever. I mean, the puppetry in this film and the Jim Henson puppeteers, they are fantastic. So there's certainly no knocking any of that. And they eventually make it to this fashion show. And at this fashion show, actually, Nicky, Charles Grodin's character, he sees Miss Piggy and he's completely enamored by her. And he even asks her out, but she's like, moi? No, no, no. And she's like, I'm with him. And Nicky's immediately jealous of Kermit.
Right. And the plan is for them to frame Miss Piggy for the theft, even though Nicky likes her. One of the model accomplices fakes an injury, and then it's like, someone has to go in and fill in for her. Piggy, you do it. And of course, that's her dream. So she goes onto the runway. And while she's on the runway, she has this fantasy sequence that involves a lot of synchronized swimming. And this also, from like a puppetry perspective, is impressive. Like, the way that they were able to have Miss Piggy swimming in the water. Also, just, I kind of think synchronized swimming is sort of impressive in general. Like, I don't watch it in the Olympics or at any other time in my life, except for really in this movie, in this scene. But whenever I happen to see it in like a movie or a TV show or something, I'm like, wow, that's got to be like insanely difficult to pull off.
I just thought the song was incredibly boring. Yeah, I thought it was cute when they all jump in the water, but like it should have been like a 20-second thing, and it went on for like 3 minutes or so. I just thought it dragged the film to a halt.
The name of the song is The First Time It Happens, and I like that song. I think it's catchy, it's orchestral.
And though you feel much more than you dare to show, the first time it happens, you know.
It was actually nominated for an Oscar for Best Original Song, believe it or not.
It must have been a weak year. I don't know. I mean, I thought it was very boring. I thought the opening song was much catchier. But Miss Piggy is framed for the robbery, and everyone's like, oh, shocked. And I do love a line. Someone asks Lady Holiday, Miss Holiday, will you ever hire a pig again? And she's like, I don't know. It's actually almost sort of like there could be a kind of like racist vibes to that with the analogy of today. Like this guy gets robs you. Will you ever hire this kind of person again? It's like, whoa, stay away from that. That was piggist, I would say.
It is piggist or speciesist or Muppet speciesist, whatever. It's bad. But then when Piggy figures out that Nicky framed her, she says, you're terrible. Your singing was terrible. You were dubbed. Because in her fantasy sequence, she's being serenaded by both Kermit and Nicky, and Charles Grodin was very clearly dubbed. So again, it's like a meta joke about the movie itself while they're in the movie. But Miss Piggy is imprisoned. She goes to jail. Kermit visits Piggy. He's dressed up as a lawyer, and it's kind of cute because they share a kiss through like this mesh screen. I feel like now whenever you see people in prison talking to a lawyer, there's like that bulletproof glass between them and they have to pick up the phone. I guess though in 1981 in England, they just had like a mesh fence between them.
I do think it's funny that when Piggy was saying, how come he hasn't visited me? And when they're like, your lawyer's here, and it turned out to be Kermit, she goes, oh, so that's why he didn't visit. He had to finish law school. I thought that was a good line. But Gonzo, he had overheard that Nicky is going to steal the so-called baseball diamond, and Kermit decides he's going to clear Piggy's name, prevent them from stealing the diamond, and he tells all the other Muppets at the Happiness Hotel, he's like, we may die out here, and I don't fault any one of you for not showing up. I mean, this exact speech was in Glory that we reviewed like a month ago.
Right.
And then, the next day, wow, not a single person deserted. But in this film, right when he says that, like, you could be killed, dismembered, maimed, like, all the Muppets are like, yeah, count me out. I'm leaving. Oh, really? We could leave and it's totally cool? Oh, thanks for saying that. And then Fozzie has to kind of be like, no, you guys have to join us.
Right. And then they're talking about like what they need for the plan. And you see Nicky and his models going through their checklist. And it's, like an infrared device and a computer, whatever, and a grappling gun and all of these like high tech things for their heist. And the Muppets are saying things like yo-yo, fake vomit, whoopee cushion. And not only are these things not going to be at all helpful, they don't even have these things. Like fake vomit, no, we lost that. So like they are totally unprepared, whereas Nicky and his gang are totally prepared. And they're breaking into this place that has the baseball diamond. It's called the Mallory Gallery, which I thought was very funny. Every time somebody said the words Mallory Gallery, that just kind of made me laugh. And while these two groups are going to the Mallory Gallery, Miss Piggy breaks out of jail because, as we saw in the first movie, she has superhuman strength sometimes. She literally like rips open the bars of the jail cell with her bare hands. It's just her Piggy super strength. And she like tries to hitchhike. A truck pulls over. She kicks the guy out of the truck. And then there's another Sesame Street cameo. We had Big Bird in the first movie. And here's Oscar the Grouch, which doesn't really make sense why he would be in London. I mean, he should be on Sesame Street, which is in America.
Yeah, it is a great line, though, because the trucker, he's like, what are you doing here? And Oscar says, I'm doing a cameo. How about you? And he says, me too. I didn't recognize the human, but apparently it's a guy named Peter Ustinov.
You don't know Peter Ustinov?
No, I do not. Would you like to enlighten us and tell us who Peter Ustinov is, Al?
I would be happy to. Peter Ustinov was in a movie that we have reviewed on this podcast.
Oh, was he Rocky Balboa in Rocky? Or Rocky 2?
No, he definitely wasn't. But he was the voice of Prince John and King Richard in the animated Robin Hood movie.
Oh, yeah, I like that film. You did not.
I remember you liked that movie. But yeah, I didn't recognize him either. I looked that up on IMDb. But it is true. But while Piggy is racing to the Mallory Gallery, I love all of the signs that she passes on the way. There are signs that say, Mallory Gallery, still very far. Then after she drives a truck, she crashes a truck and she steals a motorcycle. And then there's a sign that says, Mallory Gallery, at least 2 more miles, which are obviously just signs for the audience of like, no, she's still got a way to go. But Nicky and his team break into the vault. The Muppets are able to kind of like crash down on top of them from above. They make like this Muppet chain where they're all like dangling down from the skylight.
Oh, yeah, it's like the way like ants will make like a ladder of ants to go up a hill. Like they basically make a ladder of Muppets to go down.
Right. It's a weird plan that the Muppets have because they're saying that they want to catch Nicky red-handed, and then some other character says, what color is his hands now? That's a running gag they do a couple of times. But like, how are they planning to catch him? Are they planning to photograph him? Are they going to call the police? Like, none of that is clear. It almost seems like they're trying to steal the diamond too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering what their actual plan was, but it doesn't really matter. One question I have is, while this is going on, like you said, they're showing clips of Miss Piggy on a motorcycle. You know, we talked about the amazing puppetry earlier. I'm pretty sure that this is not amazing puppetry here, and I'm pretty sure that the scenes of Miss Piggy riding on a motorcycle is just a very small person in a motorcycle.
You might be right about that. I did read that there were some shots that had like a person in a Piggy costume. That might have been one of them.
Yeah, and eventually the Muppets do kind of crash down, and there's a big fight, and sort of like a keep away with the baseball diamond, and but eventually Grodin, he and his bad guys, they get the upper hand, and they're about to use a gun and kill Kermit, but then saving the day, Miss Piggy crashes the motorcycle right through the stained glass window and saves the day.
Right. And while she dispatches Marla, Carla, and Darla, she's doing all of her kung fu moves. At one point, she elbowed one of the women like right in the crotch. I don't know if you noticed that, but like I actually had to rewind it. I was like, whoa, that's like pretty brutal for a kid's movie. And the woman makes that face of like, oh, and like bends over in agony.
Yeah, but different anatomy. Anyway.
No, I mean, I think it still hurts for a woman to get hit in the crotch.
Yeah, but it was basically simulating a man getting hit in the testicles. But, I see what you mean. But, the Muppets save the day. There is a great line there when they're asking Nikki, they're like, Nikki, why are you doing this? And Grodin's line is like, because I'm the villain. And, it's another good meta line.
Right. And then they go back home. And how do they get back home? On the plane. And they're in their crates and they get thrown out again. This time they do have parachutes, unlike the first time. And then they're on their way down, and that's where we get the end credits. And that's the end of The Great Muppet Caper.
So, Al, what do you think? 1981, did it improve upon the Muppet movie? Was it worse? Does it stand the test of time? What do you think, Al?
Well, I don't know that it's as good as the Muppet movie. I think it does take a little bit of a hit in terms of quality, just because I think the first movie has so much magic of there they are, the Muppets on the big screen, and this is how they meet. And now it's and here they are going on another adventure, and it's a heist movie. Why? I don't know. Why not? And it's also kind of not really a heist movie. The title's kind of a misnomer because the Muppets don't do any capering. They sort of thwart some capering, little detail. And I also think that the songs in the Muppet movie are better than the songs in The Great Muppet Caper. That said, though, Hey a Movie is really fun. Happiness Hotel is very catchy. And I do like The First Time It Happens. It's a sweet song. And like I was saying, there are some of these gags with John Cleese and the Peter Falk thing that go on a little bit too long. I do think that it is still fun and enjoyable, and it still has that Muppet magic. We didn't mention that this was the first movie that Jim Henson ever directed. Beyond this, he only directed The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth in terms of theatrical movies. I think he directed a lot of TV episodes and TV movies and things. But I think he did a good job. I think it's a really enjoyable movie, and I'm going to say that it does stand the test of time. What do you think?
I agree with what you're saying. This is an inferior film to the first one in most ways, except I actually think that the opening song to this film is better than any of the songs in the first film. I know everyone loves Rainbow Connection, but I just think the first number is a very catchy Broadway musical opening number kind of deal. And really what saves this film for me is the meta humor. I do think that the humor is very spotty, and I don't really like the Miss Piggy character kind of in either film. I remember not being that big a fan of hers. Nothing I'm seeing now makes me revisit that and, think a different way. I love the bear frog twin gag. I think it's genuinely funny. Charles Grodin, he's a delight as always. And I was surprised. I really thought this was going to be very lame, but I actually thought it was cute. And, the songs, most of them are kind of boring. And I haven't seen this film in 30-something years, and I'm good if I don't see this film again. But I can't say that for a Muppet film, it doesn't do what it's meant to do. There's many fewer cameos in this film. I actually think that works to its advantage, because it's not oh wow, it's Orson Welles like in the last one. There's only 4 cameos in the film, and actually they credit the cameos as just 4 people. Because of that, it's not as outdated. And, it's cute, like I said, an inferior film, but it's a Muppet film, and it's got some laughs, and it's got cute Muppets, and the voices are funny, the puppetry is good, and the single musical savior is that first song, which I think is great. Happiness Hotel is also, I think that's a good song as well. So I'm going to say, 40 years after it's released, it still does what it's meant to do. So I'll say, The Great Muppet Caper does stand the test of time.
Awesome. All right. So both of us have said that the first 2 Muppet movies do stand the test of time.
You want to do the Human Centipede next week, Al, or Hostel?
No. Let's see if we can keep the streak going next week. We will wrap up our March Muppet Madness with The Muppets Take Manhattan, This movie is not on Disney Plus. There's some like rights thing where Disney doesn't own the distribution for some weird reason. But I actually have it on DVD, so I'm prepared. I guess you're going to have to rent it on Amazon. Sorry, James.
I'll rent it, whatever.
The rental fee is a small price to pay. But don't miss that episode. The Muppets are going to take Manhattan. And as always, follow us on social media. We are at Testing Time Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Let us know your thoughts on the Muppets, your favorite Muppet movie, your favorite Muppet songs, your favorite Muppet characters. Let us know. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.